Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar, The Role of Language in Global Business. My name is Francisco. Joining me here is my co-host, Micael Santos, who works directly with global prospects every day. We are very excited to share our insights with you. In this webinar, we will take you behind the scenes of what we do at Date Translations, how we help companies break language and cultural barriers, connect with international clients, and close deals worldwide. We will also share real examples and insights from our daily work, like localization for companies expanding overseas, translating technical documents for a hospital, or providing interpreters for court cases. So let's kick things off with a quick stat. Did you know that 86% of international customers are more likely to buy from companies that speak their language? That's straight from CSA research, and it really highlights how important language is when it comes to building trust in global markets. Today, we will dive into how language barriers can impact your global sales success and how precise translation and interpreting can play a critical role in overcoming those barriers. We will also explore cultural nuances and how understanding them is just as important as translating words. If only we could translate body language as well as we can translate words, right? But our goal today is simple: help you close more deals globally by showing you the power of language. So let's kick things off. Mika, take it away.
Thank you, Francisco. Really excited to be here, guys. So what we're going to cover today's talk, it's pretty much three main objectives here. Number one, the importance of culturally tailored messaging in building trust and closing deals when handling international business. Number two, the way that precise translation and interpreting can make or break negotiations in a global scale. And number three, you're going to share some common pitfalls and language obstacles that poor language translation localization can have and their consequences for your business. We're going to be sharing some real world examples, some tips and strategies on how to handle these situations. So hope this will be helpful to you guys. Just as a reminder, feel free to submit any questions. We'll be glad to know a little bit more about you guys and any obstacles or language mishaps you have faced. Please keep in mind to submit them in the Q&A session, not the direct chat, just to make it a little bit easier for us to manage. And don't be shy. I'm sure that everyone's got at least one story there about facing language obstacles. We are all in the same boat here, and we'll be glad to hear from you guys during this conversation. So let's dive right in. Francisco, over to you.
Mika, expanding into international markets isn't just about translating your pitch, it's about tailoring it to the local culture. When you're selling to clients from different countries, language is more than just words. It's cultural nuance, tone, and understanding market-specific values. We can mention big examples that everyone here will probably feel related to, like Netflix expansion into India, where they didn't just translate their content. They added culturally relevant subtitles, dubbed popular series with well-known local actors, and even adapted their marketing campaigns to Indian traditions. This strategy led to a 25% market share in the region by 2023. But let's be real, you don't need to be Netflix sized to be related to language services. We recently had a Japanese company that was doing business in Australia and needed an interpreter for an in-person meeting in Sydney. The interpreter assisted an audience of 10 English-speaking people to understand a Japanese businessman presentation, and then also acted as a bridge in one-on-one meetings. Long story short, we had them break language and cultural barriers, and the deal went through successfully. But let's go with one more fun example. Take Egypt in March. That's right in the middle of Ramadan. If you are running a marketing campaign and push for a big lunch hour promo, well, good luck with that. Most people are fasting during the day. But if you tweak your approach and focus on iftar, the meal that breaks the fast at sunset, you are speaking their language. Maybe you offer a special evening deals, a highlight message of community and generosity, or even partnered with local influencers to make it more authentic. That's what real localization looks like. It's not just about translating, it's about making sure your message actually fits the culture. And that's what we do every day at Day Translations. So far, we talked about cases where language services made a huge difference in a good way. But let's be real, things can go very wrong too. Remember how I kicked things off with that big Netflix example? Well, let's wrap up with another classic, a massive translation fail from a big, well-known bank. I won't say their name, but their tagline, assume nothing, sounded great in English, but when translated into other languages, it basically turned into do nothing. Not exactly what a bank wants to tell its customers. The mistake ended up costing them millions in rebranding just to clean up a two-word mess. So yes, don't take simple translations for granted. And ask yourself, are you building trust by speaking your client's language in a way they understand? These are the small nuances that can make or break a deal.
Exactly, Francisco. And we are very much used to seeing translation, localization efforts be more of an afterthought when businesses are planning for global outreach or expanding their business. But you can see how it should be planned and considered from the very get-go. So to effectively tailor your messaging, be sure that your brand resonates in other cultures. You have to collaborate with experts who know these target cultures inside and out.
Absolutely, Mika. Sometimes I wish translation was as simple as pulling it from Google Translate, but it's never that straightforward. So let's move on to our next point, where precise interpreting and translation play a pivotal role in negotiation success.
In negotiations, trust is the main currency involved. So without precise communication, your deal is at risk. You are less likely to close a deal if you are unsure of the information presented or feel that you don't know all the relevant facts. This problem will always be exacerbated when there are language barriers and cultural barriers involved as well. So imagine that you are in a high stakes meeting with a potential client from Japan and you don't speak Japanese, and you're negotiating a deal worth millions. Every word and phrase matters here. And it's not just about the content itself. You have to consider the words you're going to use to greet the other person, body language and gestures. They all should be considered. Any misinterpretation can easily jeopardize the trust, misrepresent terms, or even worse, lead to legal disputes. You need to be constantly aware of your phrases to ensure your intentions come across accurately. Uh, Consider that we can make mistakes by simply ordering a meal in a foreign country, not realizing what the menu is describing. So imagine that same problem, but in a high stakes meeting, instead of a menu, have a whole business and service offerings to consider. So these legal concerns that we mentioned, they're nothing to snide at. Things that can be common sense for one business in one country, or actually even a specific industry, can be completely alien to another business culture. So imagine that you are in a video call with a potential distributor overseas and you're discussing contract terms. During the conversation, the interpreter mistranslates net 30 payment terms and says it as pay within 30 days of delivery instead of 30 days from the invoice date. The distributor agrees based on that incorrect understanding, but of course, when it comes payment day, they will dispute these terms, delaying the deal, damaging the trust, and putting the whole negotiation in danger. So even a small misstep in translation during these negotiations can create unnecessary friction and risk losing a partnership altogether. We can, of course, think of cases of successful interpreting being done. A very classic example of that is the famous Renault-Nissan merger. So we had French and Japanese executives working closely, and you can bet that precise interpreting helped bridge the linguistic and cultural gaps. They had to discuss critical business jargon, terms of cooperation, cultural etiquette had to be overcome during these talks, and they were all clearly communicated, ultimately sealing the deal. So this global alliance wouldn't have been possible without this proper linguistic support. Uh, what we were trying to make it clear here is that translators and interpreters can't only have their minds in the language changes and the words that they use. They have all these other factors that they need to take into consideration when doing their jobs. So Picture this scenario. You are discussing a potential collaboration on a product launch with a partner in an EU country over video call. And at one point, the interpreter caught a crucial nuance in the partner's feedback about your product's warranty. Something that sometimes in the US could have been considered as a simple service offering a bonus, but in Europe is actually a non-negotiable clause for selling that product. So thanks to precise interpreting, you can adjust the terms in real time and avoid future disagreements. The deal is closed smoothly, both parties are confident, knowing that every detail was accurately understood. But of course, just as good interpreters can save a deal, unprepared linguists can really jeopardize your business. So consider a Chinese electronics company that once had a product demo for a US distributor, but that presentation was so poorly translated that some very critical terms were completely misunderstood, and the US distributor walked away from the deal. Think of it as something like mixing up the phrase speed bump and speed trap. Both can be used in the context of traffic, of course, but in electronics, speed trap, you're referring to that piece of element that can measure this the speed in a circuit. So you can imagine that this created a complete misinterpretation and really put the deal at risk there. So before you jump into any negotiations, make sure that you are partnering with skilled interpreters and you're able to test not only their knowledge of the language, but their understanding of these crucial terminology. Every interaction in global sales hinges on communication. So with the right language partner, you can control the narrative and keep negotiations aligned with your goals.
As we mentioned earlier, language isn't just about meaning, it's about intent, context, and understanding how your message will land on the other side of the table. That's why partnering with professional matters. Now, let's turn into our final topic, avoiding common language service pitfalls. We are diving into this point because it happens more often than you might think, relying on generic translation tools or using untrained interpreters. And language mistakes can be more than embarrassing. They can cost you customers. So let's have some fun with this and look at a few examples. I will start again with a well-known example, but I promise it's a funny one. Again, I won't say the name of the company, but it's a huge company, a Swedish multinational home appliance manufacturer. Some of you may know it for its famous slogan in the US, nothing sucks like an and it goes the name of the company there that again I won't mention. But guess what? Instead of highlighting the power of the vacuum, they ended up insulting their own product. So talk about translation failure. Or imagine you're a company sending out product manuals to customers around the world. In the English version, you got a simple instruction, click to create an account. But in the translation, somehow it turns into click to start a trial. Now, instead of smoothly signing up, customers think they are getting a free trial, or worse, they assume they will be charged later. To confusion, frustration, cancel accounts, and a flood of bad reviews, all because of one tiny wording mistake. It might not seem like a big deal, but trust me, small translation errors can have huge consequences for customer trust and your brand's reputation. And I will end with one from my own language and country, Argentina. Imagine you're launching a new t-shirt with the slogan No me toques in Spain. Perfect for that punk vibe, right? But in Latin America, it could land totally wrong. Over here, no me toques can sound that you are actually telling people to keep their tongues off you in a super aggressive way, not cool at all. Instead, try no me molestes. Still tough, but less in your face. So a slogan that works in one place might spark confusion or even offense somewhere else.
Exactly. You always have to do your best to connect with your target audience. So many businesses have to take that in consideration when expanding into markets such as Brazil and Portugal. Even though Brazil first started as part of the Kingdom of Portugal, today it's a much larger and sought out market than Portugal is. This made it so that Brazilian Portuguese is usually a priority for localization, and European Portuguese is often left aside in translation efforts. As you can guess, the day-to-day language can be very, very different in these two countries, and many words and slangs are entirely unique to each region. Some companies even try to recycle Brazilian Portuguese translation into European markets, which often makes European people very confused about the final result and even disappointed that there's only a Brazilian flag in language UI options or that their favorite TV show and movie is only dubbed in Brazilian Portuguese. And to not even mention the pronunciation differences. I myself am Brazilian. I would definitely agree with the opinion that it's often easier to understand Spanish than it is to understand the Portuguese accent. So any dubbing voiceover efforts should be treated entirely differently to avoid these issues. Another example can be the wider Latin American market. Even though there is such a thing as a blanket Latin American Spanish translation, that's something very common in the language industry, that approach may not be ideal if you're dealing with a marketing campaign or communication that takes a more informal tone and tries to connect in a deeper level with your audience. If you're translating an HR training session, for example, into the Colombian market. It's not the best idea to have an Argentinian doing that translation, as they may not be entirely mindful of subtle changes and preferred terminology used in Colombia. No offense there for them. So these decisions have to be considered every time you are translating your content. Is the goal of your translation to sell a product to mainland China? Or is it Hong Kong, Taiwan, or perhaps Singapore? All of these have to be taken into account so you can decide on the best workflow and approach for your project. So, in summary, these are the 3 points that we are considering here. Number one, translation of technical terms. So if you are too literal or if you're using industry incorrect translations, those can completely derail your message. A silly example, an automotive company translating horsepower into literally the power of a horse in a region. That would feel very outdated and unprofessional and wouldn't land at all well. Number two, ignoring these regional differences, as we discussed in the Latin American market, for example. Many companies assume that a single translation works well for all Spanish-speaking regions, even though that could be the case in certain scenarios. Spanish can vary widely in vocabulary and general tone across Spain, Mexico, Argentina. So missteps in localization make your business appear out of touch with your audience. And lastly, number third, failing to consider culture, humor, or etiquette. Humor, casual cultural references can seem harmless in one place, but offend other audiences. A British campaign that uses a joke well loved in UK can cause outrage if you try to reuse the same thing in Asia, where the phrase can be interpreted as disrespectful. Another example back to Brazil and Portugal, a lot of the common everyday vocabulary in Portugal has very sexual or insulting connotations in Brazil. So if you try to use the same jargon, your content will quickly become a meme factory, and you know that Brazilians love their memes.
These examples highlight why you need professionals who understand the nuances of language and culture. Partnering with experts, it's not just an investment in translation, it's an investment in your global credibility.
So I hope we could explain all these points to you and give you a quick overview of what it means to engage in global business and considering translation localization. And we would now love to hear from your questions. Please drop in the Q&A session. If you have not perhaps not a question, but just a story or anecdote you want to share, we'll be glad to hear them. And we already have one that was submitted here during our talk. It is an anonymous attendee, but they asked, thank you for the webinar. My question would be, what are the best first steps for a small business expanding into global markets? Well, as you can imagine, there are a lot of variables to consider there, but let's assume that you have done the market research and you have identified a good potential market that your product will resonate and that would make sense to that location. The first step in order to engage with that audience is definitely partnering with a language service provider that can provide you with a workflow that will suit your needs and adapt your voice to that target audience. That may just mean going for a more straightforward translation if you're dealing with a very technical product that maybe is consumed by a very technical audience. But if it's something with a wide mass market appeal, like a food or entertainment, we may need to get very creative there to make some significant changes and find ways that this content will best resonate with the people you're trying to reach. I know it's not a very complete answer, but we definitely have to go with a case by case to best understand how to approach this.
We have one more. This one I will take it from Milos. How you decide whether to prioritize translation or localization for a specific market? That's a great question. And it basically depends on the market needs. Translation focuses on word-by-word translation, usually more appropriate for certificates, court proceedings, or very technical texts, while localization adapts content to reflect cultural nuances. For example, entering a highly sensitive or competitive market typically requires localization for better impact.
And just to expand on that a little bit, I think it's important to clarify that even the term localization is fairly recent in the industry, and it's pretty much brought forward to better illustrate all these considerations and nuances that have to be discussed when uh, translating and localizing content. So being aware of cultural differences, making more drastic changes to content. This is all easier to understand when you make this distinction between translation and localization. But of course, every localization consists of translation, and now we split them apart to refer to translation as this more literal and direct approach. What are the warning signs that a translation or interpretation might not be up to standard? You want to take this one, Flo?
Yes, of course. Um, it can be hard to tell when you don't know the target language, but you should look for inconsistencies in terminology, awkward phrasing that feels unnatural, or content that doesn't align with local cultural expectations. A very clear sign is when your intended audience needs clarifications or responds unexpectedly.
Perfect. And that's always a challenge. You're relying on a professional there to help with a language that you don't know. But there's definitely ways to spot if you're having communication obstacles, but that's why it's always best to rely on professionals that have a established reputation and that have previous experience in the subject matter and the industry that you're dealing with. We have one more question here. How can a company ensure consistency across translation for different markets? This is a very important one. So there are a few techniques that can be used. The use of a centralized glossary is always important. Having a style guide as well for more general instructions on how the brand tone of voice should be. Having a brand book is always very important as well. And you should be working with language professionals that are familiar with your brand, familiar with the industry, and that can bridge any of these differences that can occur when dealing with different languages. You should always maintain very open communication across all teams. So that's where the project management aspect comes into place. You have to be able to uh, get feedback from one language, identify what is valid for another, and apply accordingly to make sure that these changes are consistent in all of them. So information is key in these situations, both getting feedback from interpreters, from translators, and as well, of course, the teams that are consuming this content. If you have branches worldwide that are using marketing material, for example, you should always be getting their feedback to make sure that this content is useful to them. So both objective and subjective feedback, it's very helpful here. Just knowing, oh, this doesn't feel like us is also helpful to a language service provider. They will take that into account to make the adequate changes and make sure that your preferred style of communication, the ideal phrasing for you, will be shared with all stakeholders to properly convey your message. It's important to remember that translating is all about making a series of decisions, right? You constantly have to decide on what you want to emphasize most, on what aspects are the most important of your phrase, of your message. So just sharing these decisions being made and making sure that everyone's on the same page is a very important process of localization translation to multiple languages.
And great questions, everyone. Before we wrap up, let me summarize today's key takeaways. First, culturally aligned messaging builds trust and drives global sales. Second, professional linguists can save or break your negotiations. It's shown in some of the examples we mentioned. And three, avoid pitfalls by working with language experts who know your industry. That's super important. If you are interested in a free consultation or just want to chat about how your team's doing internationally, drop us an email at sales@daytranslation.com. We will be very happy to help you. And thank you very much for joining us today. And we hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you, everyone. Glad that you all participated.